I brought both of you guys into this call today because the thought was that we could talk a little bit about what ideas you guys have and what you guys are trying to accomplish with the new social justice subcommittee that you guys want to create within our student athlete advisory committee. So to just start us off, do one of you guys want to tell us why you're starting this subcommittee and where it kind of came from?
I'll go first. The reason why I wanted to do this subcommittee is because I feel like there's lots of people who don't know where to approach the whole social justice problem or know where to help or find information. And I feel like with social media and us being in quarantine a lot is there's so much false information floating around. And I feel like me and Sofi will be able to kind of find that information and push it towards Portland State athletes and honestly bigger than Portland State athletes. Just to have an outlet to where they can trust and know that the information being shared is true.
Yeah, I think that as student athletes, we have a platform, and it's our privilege to have a platform, and we need to use that platform. And during such, I guess, during the social justice movement, it's a good time to use it and gather, especially when a lot of us aren't playing. We have time, we're ready to work towards something together, and we have the ability to do it.
And also with the whole platform, I feel like, yeah, we can repost everything on Instagram and all that stuff, but kind of like, I feel like we need to take more initiative than just do that, because it's honestly a lot more than that. And I feel like if we're using our platform right now to kind of make a certain group to tackle this problem, or not tackle it, just to inform people, I feel like we're amplifying our voice to be heard.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the one thing that the conversation that I keep having with people is that this needs to be more than a moment. It needs to be a true movement, right? So the social media has been great for building awareness, but there's so much more when it comes to education, when it comes to activism. Right now in our election, being able to have students and student athletes use their voice and making sure that their voice is being heard, I think is really important. Did you guys have specific ideas of some of the things that you wanted to start with or who you wanted to get involved with?
I started off I met this guy who's a big activist in Portland right now. He's led many protests around the Portland area, and just having him as a contact, being able to like talk to him and see where should the focus be, you know, because there's lots of good information out there, but what's not being heard is what I kind of want to head towards. So what I was thinking about doing, kind of just spread it out through all Portland State athletics, is try to get each team to maybe like once or twice a week to have something they want to talk about and discuss about, just so we can kind of keep that conversation going within our teams. And then we could have our social media post something about it or what they learned about this week. And I feel like that would be good because nobody has to go out of their way to do this stuff. You know, it's a whole team effort, and everybody's going to be able to put in their piece and feel important and understand what's going on.
Yeah, we have so many student athletes who have gotten involved separately and bringing those student athletes in and doing it together. I mean, we're in downtown Portland. There's a lot of political unrest here, and there's a lot of protests, and there's a lot of good things going on and big movements. So finding how we can be a part of that, finding how we can amplify that, and using all the student athletes and bringing them together.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I think about a lot is college students right now are way more involved than just a few years ago, let alone 10, 20 years ago. You guys are our future. So that's one thing that I think is really awesome, is that this time, while there are a lot of really serious things going on, movements going on, it also has gotten everybody involved in this election and everything. So with your guys' group around you, have you noticed that as well, that there are a lot more people that are voting this year or got registered to vote, or even that the conversations are even happening? Because I know that those weren't even happening in the past.
Yeah, I think within SAC, one of the things we did push for was voter registration, and we talked to coaches, and the coaches send that message out to the team, and we got a good majority of our student athletes registered to vote. And even in my day-to-day life, politics, this social justice movement, it comes up every day. We're talking about it. We're figuring out what we can do. We're learning what each other think about it and where everyone stands. The first step we wanted to push was voting, and it's exciting for me. It's my first presidential election to vote in, and that's the same for a lot of college athletes right now. So being able to do that for the first time is exciting, and we wanted to push that.
Outside of Portland State athletics, back when I was trying to get everybody to register, just in my friend group and just the people who I'm around the most, it was crazy how many people said like they didn't know about voting, or kind of just they didn't do it. And I was just like, whoa, it's kind of not that hard, like you see all this stuff, but kind of like I said earlier, they really just don't know where to start because they kind of feel uncomfortable with the situation. So I feel like us doing this is kind of making them feel more comfortable with talking about it and having those uncomfortable conversations with their peers and everything.
Yeah, my parents, they grew up voting, so I just thought that was something you did. And talking to a lot of my friends, they didn't register, their parents didn't vote. So it's been good to inform people and have those conversations and figure out where you stand and what you're for. But just having those conversations within our friend groups has increased a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the conversation piece is so important. And I think a lot of times, maybe it is happening within some of your peer groups, but definitely the conversations with coaches and administrators and maybe adults doesn't happen quite as often between like the student and the coach, or the student and the administrator. And that's something that I think we really want to open those lines of communication, because I will be the first to say I am no expert. And there are so many times where I'm having conversations and I will second guess, and I'm like, did I just say something that was wrong? Like, and then I get nervous about it. But like, that's how we need to feel. Like, we need to feel uncomfortable. We need to feel that we are pushing to new places. And I think that that's one thing that's really important.
Having those uncomfortable conversations is what's going to help everything be more understanding with everybody.
Yeah, and I think having those uncomfortable conversations makes it more comfortable as you go on. And one of the things our coaches has done was kind of offer a blank slate. So no matter where you're standing on things, they wanted to give us information. So if you were struggling to find what's the true information with the social media, with so much false information, they were there to help, and they offered to do it as unbiased as possible. So having our coaches do that for us is really helpful. And I think it helps students who are scared to vote and don't know where to even begin.
Right. I think another thing that I think about often is, I know that I'm coming from a place of privilege and a lot of times having my blinders on to a lot of things. And it wasn't intentionally, it was just that where I grew up was a very predominantly white area. And then when you go into college athletics, you're typically surrounded by a lot of diversity and people from all different places with all different opinions and backgrounds. And I think sometimes we take that a little bit for granted, because you're like, well, in my bubble, there doesn't seem to be as much happening, right? Like, I don't see the racism every single day that is happening in our world. So I think sometimes in athletics, sometimes we can feel, and honestly in certain areas of the country, people are feeling different things as well. But I think that's one thing we have. Our students are spread out all across the country right now, and everyone's experiencing different things. It has different backgrounds, but how do each of us kind of take that step? So for me, I'm, reading new books. I'm trying to have more conversations, but what are some other things that either you guys have done or that you could recommend to other people when we're talking about social justice everything.
I think like one thing that resonated with me that you said is that we do have the privilege also to ignore the fact that this is happening. Like, as a white female, I have the privilege to ignore that this is happening. And that's one reason I wanted to get so involved and start this subcommittee within SAC to push for social justice and get people involved, because I have the privilege to ignore it and I don't want to ignore it. We've ignored it for a long time. A lot of people have ignored it and it needs to stop. I've been reading a lot of books and supporting Black businesses, Black artists, people of color, minorities. Little things like that, I think, go a long way, and it just starts to get the ball rolling.
What I've been doing a lot is kind of like just kind of giving subtle pushes to my friends just to kind of like inform themselves and just kind of understand what's going on. Because people are easy now to see these videos of all this terrible like brutality going on, and they're just like, wow, that's terrible. And anybody could say it. Like, it's been going on for so long, but it's like, what are you doing to stop that? You know, what are you supporting? What are you trying to understand better why the situations are happening? You know, it's not just like, oh, that happens. Like, oh, let's keep moving on. Like, no, like, not at all. That's not how it is. So I feel like just those small pushes to get people to understand rather than just see it, you know. It's two different things to see it, but to process it is huge.
For sure. And I think I think another thing is making sure that, like, I can say over and over, like, I'm not racist, but it's not, that's not it. It's, we need to be anti-racist. We need to use our voice to stand up and to amplify the voices of those that haven't had that voice. We need to look deeper and look at everything with a whole new lens, because I think everybody has biases and everybody has, you know, the way that they grew up, and you need to critically look at absolutely everything you're doing. And that's another thing I think that I'm really trying to do.
Yeah, implicit bias is a real thing, and especially in our society, things like media phrases about minorities, titles about minorities are phrased very differently than titles about white people, and things like that makes it systemic. It makes it, that's how you grew up, that's how we perceive these things, and you have to actively fight against that. And that's why not being racist isn't enough. You have to actively be anti-racist, because the system is built against minorities and people of color and Indigenous people. So you have to be actively fighting against that rather than just.
Yeah.
I feel like the biggest thing is people aren't putting themselves in other people's shoes, kind of like what you said, Lindsay, because honestly, like it seems night and day to me and many of the people around me, but to some people it's just not going through their head how this is like, okay. And I'm just like, that makes no sense on how. And I'm like, I'm trying to understand, but I really can't understand what those people are thinking or going through, or what are they seeing what I'm not seeing. It's just really, I just don't understand it.
And I think sharing stories is also really important, because I think that was another thing, is that when I came into an advisor role, or when I was a student athlete and I would talk to my peers, and I was like, wow, your experience is a lot different than what I've experienced. And I have been in not denial, but like just didn't know. Like I really didn't know. And it wasn't coming from a bad place. You know, I knew racism existed. I knew that police brutality existed, but I didn't have somebody kind of tell me that story, and it didn't make it real. And now I think we as white people are waking up and like noticing that these things are actually existing and taking a stand, which I think is really important.
Yeah, one thing I've looked at a lot because I'm studying public health is how racism goes into the healthcare system and the health structure, and it exists there too. So there are a lot of people who like to claim that different jobs, different areas, it doesn't exist, but it does. And there's significant disproportionate mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates for things that shouldn't be happening. And I've learned a lot about how it plays out in the healthcare system. And I have the privilege to learn about that and see the numbers and look at that. And a lot of people don't, but I think it's important to start expressing that information in healthcare, just simply when you walk in, and be respected.
Do you guys have anything else that you think would be important to share right now, either with other student athletes, with our athletic department, with outside of our athletic department?
I just want to kind of tell everybody that it's okay not to understand what's going on, but it's not okay to sit there and just watch it all go by. So I feel like if you really want to approach us or join us in kind of the subcommittee to understand what's going on in the world, kind of just reach out. Don't feel afraid, because we're learning too. It's not like you're the only person who doesn't know anything. So just feel free to ask us questions or any help or anything. We're here to help.
Yeah, I think it's been easy to be like, oh, the first step is voting, and the voting cycle, we're getting close to the end of the voting cycle, and this subcommittee will give us a place to go to continue the voice and figure out what else we can do beyond voting and keep it rolling and make it a movement, not a moment. And I think it's important to remember after this voting cycle is done that there's more that can be done and we need to do more.